The Unquenchable Spark. This is an advanced C1 level English short story by Greg Salters. Use the questions and glossary found at the end of the paper version of the story to help in your comprehension and progression to C2.
Ethan had spent his life in quiet fear, never daring to name the part of himself that he instinctively knew would never be accepted at home. His family's life revolved around the church. His father, a deacon and respected figure in their small, conservative town, took pride in upholding the values he preached to others every Sunday. Ethan's mother had always been quiet, reserved, following her husband's lead in everything. Together, they instilled in Ethan a sense of duty to God, family, and community, a duty that left no room for doubt, nor for the stirring feelings he had begun to feel as he grew older. The few times he dared to ask questions or to voice his confusion, he'd been silenced. His father's voice echoed in his mind, heavy and condemning. Every syllable a blow. The path to righteousness is narrow, Ethan. Stray from it, and you'll find nothing but ruin. Those words had been drilled into him like scripture, reinforced with every subtle dig, every lecture about the dangers of sin, and sometimes, when he resisted, with his father's raised hand. When he had dared to come close to the edge of admitting his truth, one that even he couldn't name, because the language to describe it was forbidden in his household, his father had sensed it. The punishment had been swift and brutal. His teenage years were spent hiding, hoping no one would notice the way he lingered on certain feelings, or how his gaze would catch on other boys in ways that terrified him. In church, he'd hear words about fire, about judgment, about those who would burn in damnation for the lives they led. Every word felt personal, like a wound carved deep into his soul. Over time, the fear had twisted into self-hatred, a quiet loathing of a part of himself he wished he could simply erase. So, when university finally pulled him away from the small, insular world he'd grown up in, it was as though he had been given air for the first time. He could walk without feeling eyes on him, without feeling the weight of his father's expectations dragging him down. But freedom, it turned out, was only the beginning. He still carried that hidden part of himself, like a burden he couldn't let go of. And even as he began to explore his identity in secret, shame lingered, a constant, oppressive shadow. One evening, he found himself in the university library, drawn to the quiet comfort of the bookshelves. He had developed a habit of retreating there when the memories grew too painful, when he felt the need to escape from his own mind. As he wandered through the aisles, his eyes landed on a book that seemed to glow from within, its edges soft and worn, as though it had been passed down from person to person, each leaving behind a trace of themselves. The title was Giovanni's Room, and though he hadn't read Baldwin's work before, he'd heard of him. Heard whispers of a queer writer who dared to write about men loving men. For reasons he couldn't explain, Ethan felt drawn to the book. He took it down from the shelf and sank into a quiet corner, opening the pages as if searching for something he couldn't name. As he read, Baldwin's words struck him like a lifeline, piercing through layers of fear and shame. He was captivated by the story of David, a man who loved another man and wrestled with it against a backdrop of isolation, yearning, and self-discovery. In those pages, Ethan found the words he'd never been allowed to speak. He felt the weight of David's confusion, the pain of his denial, the longing that he had always felt but never dared express. And then, as he turned another page, he felt something strange, a warmth against his hand, as if the book itself were alive. He looked down, startled, but saw only the pages before him. Yet, with every line he read, the warmth grew until it was more than just a feeling in his hand. It was a fire kindling in his heart, filling him with a strength he had never known. He lifted his gaze, and there, standing before him, was a figure of radiant, shifting light. Ethan's heart caught in his throat as he took in the being's form, a body made of flickering flames, embodying every color of the rainbow, each flicker filled with a history of pain and power. Despite their fierce, blazing appearance, the figure's eyes held a gentle compassion that reached out to him, melting the fear he'd carried for so long. "Ethan," The figure spoke, their voice resonant, like distant thunder softened by rain. Do you know what it means to carry the spark? He could barely form words, clutching Giovanni's room to his chest as if it were a shield. Shaking his head, he whispered, No, I don't think I do. The figure smiled, radiating warmth that seemed to dissolve the weight of his fear. I am Flamma Indomita, the unquenchable flame. I am born of those who, like you, have faced a world that tried to break them. I come from the fires of Stonewall, from the quiet courage of those who loved in silence, from every heart that has dared to be true despite the cost. The fire you feel within, that is their legacy. It lives in you. A tear slipped down Ethan's cheek. But I've been so afraid, he said, his voice breaking. I was taught that I should hate this part of myself, that I'd burn for it. Flamma Indomita's eyes softened, and they reached out a hand, inviting him to understand. Fear is a shadow, Ethan. Shadows are cast by the light, but they can never quench it. The fire within you, the love you carry, that is your light. It is the love of everyone who came before you, who fought to make the world a place where you could live freely. This book, they gestured to Giovanni's room, is part of that light, that fire. Baldwin's words have kept many from falling into despair, just as they will for you. Ethan stared down at the book in his hands, feeling its significance resonate through him. It was no longer just a story. It was a lifeline, a bridge to a past he was only beginning to understand. But how do I live with it? He asked, voice trembling. How do I exist in a world that taught me to hate myself? Flamma Indomita's face glowed with empathy and unwavering strength. You are already part of something larger, something that cannot be broken by hatred or shame. Every time you love, every time you live openly, you honor the fire within you. You are connected to a history of courage, of people who have loved in the face of violence and who have lived despite the world's rejection. The fire is a reminder that you belong, that you have always belonged. As Ethan absorbed their words, he felt the heaviness of his father's condemnation begin to lift. He realized that his existence was not a sin but a gift, a continuation of a spirit that had burned fiercely through centuries of repression, surviving in the stories of queer lives and voices, in the words of Baldwin and so many others who had lived unapologetically. When you feel alone, Flamma Indomita continued, their voice as steady as a drumbeat. Remember that you carry their light within you. It cannot be extinguished. You are never alone. You are part of an unending fire. The flames surrounding Flamma Indomita blazed brighter, filling the library with an ethereal warmth. And as they did, Ethan felt the last vestiges of his old fear melt away. With one final, knowing look, Flamma Indomita vanished, leaving behind a warmth that settled in his bones. Sitting there, clutching Giovanni's room, Ethan felt the quiet assurance that he was no longer bound by the shame and fear that had shadowed him for so long. Baldwin's words had shown him a way forward, and Flamma Indomita's spark had ignited a strength within him, a flame that he now understood was not just his, but belonged to everyone who had fought to love openly. He spent the days that followed reading more stories, learning about queer voices throughout history, connecting to the lives that had once seemed distant but now felt like family. And whenever doubt began to creep back, when memories of his father's condemnation loomed, he remembered Flamma Indomita's words, echoing like a gentle flame. You are a part of something that can never be extinguished. The fire is endless, and it lives in you. In that knowledge, Ethan found the courage to be his true self, to live with the unquenchable fire that had been passed to him. He would carry it forward, burning brightly, fiercely forever.
Thanks for listening. For more great Flamma Indomita adventures, visit the Queer Triptych at www.queertriptych.weebly.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe.